저희가 이제 거시경제를 위해서 정말 유명하신 분을 모셨죠. 네. 크리시스 사이클의 저자이자 존 코크런 교수님을 모셨습니다. 저희가 한번 좀 여쭤보도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 소개 좀 부탁드리도록 할게요.
Today we're really excited to be joined by Professor Cochrane. Could you start by telling us a bit about yourself and also your areas of research?
I'm an economist. I work here at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. I spent 30 years at the University of Chicago before I came out here, following in the footsteps of Milton Friedman. And I work primarily on stocks and bonds, asset pricing, business cycles, and these days monetary policy, Fed, inflation, deficits, all that sort of thing. But being an economist is wonderful because I can work on so many things. I've done health insurance and statistics and all sorts of different things. But those are my main things that I work on these days.
그러면 한번 여쭤보도록 할게요. 이제 물가 수준 재정 이론을 통해서 가장 유명해졌는데 인플레이션 연구로. 그러면 인플레이션이 발생하는 이유가 뭔지 좀 궁금하거든요.
So you're very well known for your perspective on inflation based on the fiscal theory of the price level. Could you explain to us a bit about why inflation happens?
Yes, and especially why I think inflation happens. Fundamentally, inflation happens when people don't want to hold the government debt, and so they try to buy things with it and send up the prices of the things they buy. That's the fiscal theory of the price level. Another way, there's many stories I can tell. Another way of saying it, here's $1. This is $20. It's pretty valuable. It's a piece of paper. Why do we work so hard for a piece of paper? Why can a 10-cent piece of paper get us so much? Well, you need these to pay your taxes. And so the fact that the government takes this and only this in terms of taxes is fundamentally what makes this thing valuable.
그러면 이제 국가 입장에서는 세금을 이익이라고 볼 수 있는 거네요.
In that sense, would that mean tax is profits for government?
Exactly. Tax is profits for the government, helps the government to pay off its debts. Taxes remove money from the economy, so higher taxes will lower inflation or less spending, so that the government is removing money from the economy. If the government is putting too much into the economy, spending more than it takes in taxes, both now and in the future, then you have too much money chasing too few goods and you get inflation.
그러면 좀 인플레이션이 심할 때는 세금도 같이 늘리는 게 좋은 건가? 또 궁금하네요.
So would that mean if we have serious inflation, would it be better to collect more taxes?
Or spend less,
Yes.
or more importantly, have people have faith that over the long run, the government will pay back its debts. You can run deficits today, you can have big debts today, if people have faith that those will be paid back by future tax revenue less than spending. And usually it's healthier for the economy to cut the spending rather than raise the taxes.
Right.
But both ways work.
Related to your view on inflation, I also hear you say that if the spending becomes uncontrollable, that there's a limitation in what the Fed can do with inflation, in controlling inflation. Could you explain why that's the case?
Central banks are limited in the tools that they have. They can raise interest rates, and they can buy bonds in return for money. But if the government is running deficits with no ability to repay them, people won't hold that debt no matter what the central bank does. They won't hold the debt, they won't hold the money, they'll try to get rid of it before it loses value, and they drive up the price of everything else. So when there are serious debts and deficits that won't be repaid, you get inflation, and there's really not much the central bank can do. And we've seen that many times. It's clear in Argentina until recently. They were printing money to finance deficits. And with those deficits, there's not much, the central bank didn't have much choice. If they were just printing debt to finance deficits, no one would hold the debt and you'd still get inflation.
지금 상황이 관세도 있고 이제 세금도 이제 문제도 이슈도 있었었고 거기에 재정 지출, 뭐 국가 부채, 이제 규제라던가 이제 뭐 제조업의 리쇼링까지 다 이제 더해져서 이제 앞으로 향후 인플레이션에 어떻게 영향을 줄지 좀 궁금하거든요.
So We're currently going through a lot of policy changes, including the tariff policies, changes in fiscal spending, tax reform, deregulation, and also the reshoring of certain manufacturing industries. So how do you think these factors will affect inflation?
These factors are mostly important for how they affect the real economy. And remember, I study inflation because it's fun, but the real economy is what actually counts.
Right.
And, you know, if we measure in dollars or in won, we have the same real amount. So in the end, inflation just is a different measurement. And it's a mistake that people often make to confuse prices with inflation. Now, how can I say that? Suppose, the price of cups goes up because it becomes harder to manufacture cups, or there's a tariff on cups. Well, that makes the price of cups higher relative to the price of pens, but it doesn't explain why the price of everything goes up and down. Inflation is the price of everything. So those things do affect inflation, and I would say primarily they influence the Federal Reserve, the central bank, in what it does with interest rates, which still matters tremendously for inflation. So for example, I think if a tariff raises the price of cups, rather than let the price of other things go down, the central bank will lower interest rates and let the price of everything go up to try to offset the damage. That's how tariffs turn into inflation. Number one, they make the central bank stimulate. Tariffs and good things on the economy can help to lower inflation, because if the economy booms, the government makes more in taxes, spends less, and therefore you have lower deficits and lower inflation.
네, 그럼 종합적으로 봤을 때는 인플레이션 상승 압박이 좀 강한 상태인지 아닌지.
So in aggregate, when we consider all those factors, would you say that overall it's going to have inflationary pressure, or the opposite way?
It's very hard to forecast, because if everybody knew there would be inflation next year, they would raise their prices now. So inflation is always going to be difficult to forecast. I think there is a danger of inflation, but I don't want to say it's going to happen again soon. I think the biggest danger is a repeat of what happened in 2021, 2023, where we had a crisis, COVID. The government responded to that crisis by printing up trillions of dollars of money and trillions of dollars of new debt, writing people checks with no talk about how do we pay this back. It was perfect fiscal theory of the price level. We got inflation. So I worry that the next crisis will cause that kind of inflation, but I don't know when the next crisis will happen.
So a follow-up question on that response is, in terms of how reshoring will could eventually rebalance supply and demand in the long term, would you say that could have a positive effect on inflation?
Well, depends how reshoring happens. So first, supply and demand are always balanced in just at different levels. If the U.S. takes to protectionism, we'll do everything ourselves, big trade barriers. Most importantly, that will be bad for the economy overall. So before we even talk about inflation, the most important thing is that will be very bad for U.S. economic growth and very bad for the growth of our trading partners who, like Korea, make all sorts of wonderful stuff and send it to us. We have a wonderful trading relationship. Reshoring all the great cars that Koreans make and send to us would be very inefficient. So I think that's the most important feature of this kind of industrial policy and trade barriers that we see. I think it is potentially stagflationary, because it'll make the U.S. worse off. It'll make faith in U.S. government and our government securities worse off on the margin. But the most important thing about these policies is to evaluate what they do to the real economy.
그리고 요새 지금 그 물가 목표를 3%로 올려야 된다라는 얘기도 종종 나오거든요. 근데 지금 2% 아직까지는 지금 목표를 보고 있잖아요. 그거에 대해서 어떻게 생각하시는지도 좀 궁금합니다.
So recently, there's been talks about raising the target inflation rate to 3% instead of the 2% that we currently have. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's a good idea. I think lower inflation over the long run is better. It's sort of like if you eat too much over the holidays and you gain a few kilos, do you want to buy bigger pants or do you want to lose the weight? I would prefer that we lose the weight rather than just give in and have more inflation. In fact, I think the inflation target should be reduced to zero, not even 2%. If I could follow up on that one, in 1980, the U.S. had really big inflation. And many economists said, oh, just give up. Keep the high inflation. It'll be too hard to get it back down. The U.S. chose to get inflation back down. And I think now we are much better off than we would be if we had adopted perpetual 10 to 15% inflation.
So as you just mentioned that you would actually prefer a 0% inflation, you proposed in your 2023 Project Syndicate article that we should have a price level target instead of an inflation rate target. While that sounds ideal in theory, would you say that it's like really realistically, politically possible?
Well, anything that is ideal in theory should be practical in the real world. Political is another question. But it's not a wild idea. We had stable price level for hundreds of years under the gold standard. Now, the gold standard was not perfect in any way, and I do not think we should go back to a gold standard. But it was possible, and it has advantages. We don't shorten the meter 2% every year to try to make business a little better for tailors. We keep the meter the same every year. Why should the standard of value slowly depreciate over years? And you asked me politically, our Fed mandate, like the ECB mandate, is price stability. I don't think they meant 2% inflation forever. I think they meant price stability. So I think, in fact, it is, if explained as a good idea, it is very politically feasible.
여쭤보고 싶었던 게 연준 점도표라고 해야 될까요? 장기 인플레이션이 보면 2%가 안 나오고 자꾸 3% 쪽에 머물더라고요. 한 3년 뒤 정도에도. 그래서 지금 왜 그런 미국은 인플레이션을 빠르게 못 잡고 있는지 그게 좀 궁금합니다.
When we look at the inflation rate expectations in the next few years, the data keeps showing us approximately 3% inflation going forward. What would be the reason for why the US is unable to control the inflation rate back to 2%?
Because they're not really trying. So the Fed says, oh, anchored, but you can see right now the pressure on the Fed to lower interest rates. You can see the history of the big surge in inflation when the Fed kind of sat around and didn't do much for a whole year. So I think the expectations are 3% because people are worried that inflation could come right back out again, and the Fed is not able or willing to pound its fist on the table and say, inflation, number one, above all, we're not going to do anything else till we get inflation down to 2%.
그러면 이게 좀 더 장기화됐을 때 그렇다 하더라도 인플레이션 우려는 아직 좀 없다고 보시는지 궁금해요.
If this trend continues, are you worried that there would be just perpetual increase in inflation, or do you think there's a path for it to be controlled again?
I think it's a path for it to be controlled again. Administration would say, we really don't want inflation. We don't want to suffer the same fate as Biden did when he got inflation. We'd like to stay in office, so we want low inflation. The Congress says we want low inflation. The Fed says we want low inflation. We get our fiscal deficit under control, which is one of the things that threatens inflation. The Fed becomes committed to inflation. Sure, inflation could be controlled. Inflation is a choice like anything else. We just have to make that choice.
그럼 스테이블 코인 한번 여쭤볼까요? 지금 스테이블 코인이 이제 등장하고 커지고 있는데 이게 인플레이션에 어떤 영향을 주는지 궁금합니다.
We are also seeing a rapid increase of digital assets, including stablecoins. How do you think this trend would affect inflation or monetary policy?
I think stablecoins are very interesting and a nice innovation. They so for listeners who don't know, a stablecoin is a coin that is backed by short-term U.S. Treasuries. So it's very much just like a money market fund. I think it will help payments to be more efficient. If you want to get money from Korea to the US, a stablecoin could be a cheap way to do it. So for that reason, I think it's wonderful. I don't think it will have a big impact on inflation because it's just a different form of money and doesn't fundamentally change the value of those securities. You're holding a stablecoin which holds the securities. So the value of the stablecoin is the value of the treasury securities. And nothing much has changed from there on in. In my lifetime, when I was young, you went to the bank and got money, and you paid money to go out to dinner. And then they invented credit cards, interest-paying checking accounts, money market funds, debit cards, electronic transactions. We now actually, I had to go get money for this show because I don't have any money normally. All this financial and payments innovation and the effect on inflation, nothing. So I think stablecoins will be another great innovation in how we pay for things with very little effect on inflation.
책을 되게 쓰셨는데 책에 어떤 내용들이 있는지 좀 부탁드립니다. 예.
Could you explain to us what's in your most recent book, Crisis Cycle?
Yes, briefly. This is joint with Luis Garicano and Klaus Masuk, two great economist friends of mine. And it's how to reform the euro. The euro is a great currency, but it has this problem that individual countries are tempted to borrow and then say, we can't pay it back. European Central Bank, please print money and bail out our bonds. That they thought about that problem, but those limits got breached, and now we're back with that problem again. And so we have a bunch of reforms to help the euro survive this temptation to borrow money and then demand that the ECB print money to pay it back.
안 그래도 어제 그 프랑스가 IMF에 들어갈 수 있다는 뉴스가 나왔는데 프랑스뿐만 아니라 지금 독일이나 나머지 국가들도 좀 부채가 심각하다라고 하더라고요. 그래서 좀 프랑스나 유럽 경제가 위기에 빠질 수 있다 보시는지 궁금합니다.
Related to the topic of your book, we recently heard that France might need help from IMF, and it seems like France and Germany has some serious problems with their national debt levels. How serious do you think those problems are, and would those eventually lead to some economic crises in some of the European countries?
Those are serious problems. It used to be Greece and Italy and Spain. Now the problem has spread to France. They have big debts. They have big deficits. No plan to pay it back. We will see if the IMF is able to force France to turn around its fiscal policies enough to solve this debt problem. This may be harder than we all think. The ECB will be tempted to print money to try to manage the problem. And I think that is the big problem facing many of our countries. The US, much of Europe, Japan, I don't know about Korea, but too much debt, many deficits, going to pay social programs, not enough taxpayers, and eventually we run out of steam and have a debt crisis.
So in the case of France, would you say the solution would be some fiscal austerity policies?
I don't like the word austerity because it doesn't have to be austerity, and it's not clear who is being austere. I prefer the word reform. France's government spends 55% of GDP. So I think we can help French citizens with their social needs for less than 55% of GDP. So I would say a big reform of the social programs, which might even include lowering taxes, deregulation, entrepreneurship. So I think when you say fiscal austerity, you typically mean brutal cuts in spending and sharp raises in taxes. France already has immense taxes. That will just kill the economy. So I think tax and spending and growth-oriented reform are the answer.
그래서 저는 아까 처음에 얘기해 주셨던 게 뭐냐면 그 국가가 빚을 갚을 능력이 없으면라고 생각되면 인플레이션이 벌어질 것이다라는 얘기를 했잖아요. 그러면 유럽은 빚을 갚을 능력이 있는지가 1번, 그러면 인플레이션이 벌어지는 거 아닌가? 이게 2번의 질문입니다.
Based on your view of inflation, we are curious about two things. So one is, does Europe have the ability to pay back the debt? And second, would that cause inflation?
So inflation comes if you don't have the ability or will to pay back the debt. Basically, when you can't pay back the debt, you either default, you simply say, I'm not paying, or you inflate, which means you pay it back in money that's worth less. And they're essentially the same thing. So Europe has the ability to pay back its debts if it makes that choice. And largely the choice is to grow. Because you pay back debt slowly over years and decades. And the easiest way to pay back debt is to let the economy grow. Europe's big problem is that it has stopped growing. And everyone sees why. Way too much regulation. Very high taxes, way too much regulation, paying people not to work. You stop growing. So Europe will pay back its debts and avoid inflation if it can get itself to start growing again.
그럼 결국 유럽의 경제 문제는 정치 문제와 연관이 있다라 볼 수 있겠네요.
In that case, would you say the economic problems in Europe is related to political factors?
Economic problems everywhere are related to political factors. The most important thing our governments could do is get out of the way and allow economic growth to happen. They have many constituencies who want protection of the way things are.
그리고 이 책이 혹시 그 러시아와 우크라이나 전쟁 이야기가 들어있는지가 좀 궁금하고, 만약에 이 전쟁이 정말 길어지면 이게 인플레이션에 어떤 영향을 끼치는지 좀 궁금합니다.
In your book, does it include a topic about the Russian and Ukraine war?
Yes.
So, if this war continues on for a longer period of time, how do you think that would affect the economy and inflation?
Again, it's less of an issue for inflation and even less of an issue for budget deficits. Yet Europe is now going to start spending on its defense, but we're talking about 3% of GDP. France spends 55% of GDP on social programs. So even a robust defense is cheap these days compared to the main budget problem, which is taxes for social programs. And the Ukraine war is tremendously important for all sorts of things, for whether our children grow up in a world where people don't invade other countries and seize territory. Inflation is about the last of those things, although a world with more wars is a world with typically more inflation because it's more stress on government budgets. But there's 100 other reasons to worry about the Ukraine war, like bigger wars.
Would you say, though, there are some economic consequences
Oh, sure.
from this war? What kind of consequences?
Wars are bad for economies, so it's directly expensive. It's terrible for the Ukrainian economy in the short run, though Ukraine will emerge from this war a defense tech powerhouse. If the war ends as I hope, Ukraine becomes part of the European Union and becomes very prosperous. So a good end to this war would be economically beneficial. I would add, eventually, I hope, Russia becomes a normal country, and then Europe can go back to buying oil from Russia without feeding Vladimir Putin's war machine. That would be good for Europe. That would be good for Russia. So there's all sorts of places where political problems are causing great economic damage.